Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day one of a very special two-day event in the P&W series on race, racism, and anti. My name is Karen Bishop Morris, and I am just beside us with anticipation and hope for what just might be our most powerful assembly to date in this series. While each and every session in the series has been significant in its own way, today and tomorrow are unique for a few reasons. Number one, many of you are here in person. So I want you to turn to your neighbor and repeat after me. Say, neighbor, it's so good to be seen. Number two, this event is Zoom synchronous and also streaming live on Facebook, which means so many of our loyal friends are also tuning in. And judging by Professor Majumdar's meticulous accounting, we have a whole lot of new friends joining us virtually today. Thank you all for being here. Number three, thanks to Professor Colette Morrow for doing the legwork for a special segment focused on community and student activists today and tomorrow. That means we would like you to approach these events with intention. Take notes, ask questions, be in touch with the organization to learn about today, and find out how you can take your passion for peaceful protest to the street. Number four, Tim Wise is in the building. Our loyal followers know that this series began in fall 2020 as a grassroots, faculty-driven response to the horrific murder of George Floyd. We thought it our duty to create space for dialogue around racialized police violence and the systemic racism that continues to characterize institutions and thwart the advancement of BIPOC individuals throughout society. This series is dedicated to Lynn Ford, founder and executive editor of the Black Agenda Report. Mr. Ford was the first guest in the series, courtesy of and in dialogue with Professor Lee Arts. Mr. Ford made his transition in the fall of 2021, and we remain grateful for his intellectual energy and the gift of his presence in kicking off this series. So a few things. We hope that you leave more knowledgeable than before. We hope that you will remain open-minded, honest, and active. And we hope that you will apply what you take away today and make a connection, recommit to doing the work. All right, so I'm going to move into some thank yous, some announcements, and some introductions. Thank you first and foremost to Deepa Majumdar, Professor of Philosophy and my partner in peaceful protest. Without Professor Majumdar's vision and tireless energy, this series would not sustain, and she is joining us virtually today. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to our sponsors, Chancellor Thomas Keon, our Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, who is here, Dr. Chris Holford, and then all of our other community partners, LaPorte County, Indiana Circuit Court, put this here, Cynthia Bank, the Purdue University Northwest College of Humanities, Social Education, and Social Sciences, P&W's Creating a Culture of Inclusion, and the Intersectional Feminist Alliance of Purdue University Northwest. A special shout out to my buddies at Lakeshore PBS, Chris Nolte, host of Regionally Speaking, and Dee Dotson, his producer, for making space just like 30 minutes ago for an interview about these events. I'd also like to thank our P&W backbones, many of whom are also in the room. Sue Brimmer from Academic Affairs, Chris Valzone and her team, Michelle Gohuli, who is here running things. Where are you, Michelle? Probably in the hall. Adara Rivera, Rachel Pollock, Jamie Eggert, and of course the AV Dream Team, Greg Collins, Sharon Allen, Josiah Tipton, and Brian Benjamin. Thanks to our media assistants, Sharon and Charlene, and thanks once more to all of you. Views and opinions expressed during the series do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Purdue University Northwest faculty, students, and staff. A reminder, you are encouraged to post your questions and comments to the chat at any time during the session. We will reserve about 15-ish minutes at the end for Q&A. Folks who are attending in person, you'll notice the microphone stationed in the center aisle. But it's super helpful if you're listening and participating via Zoom to post your questions early so that we can synthesize those questions and maximize the opportunities for participation. Very important announcement. A selection of Tim Wise's books will be available for purchase at the PNW Hammond Campus Bookstore. Books can be ordered by going to the Hammond Campus Bookstore website or by calling 219-844-1081. Tim will be signing books in the bookstore tomorrow at Hammond, Wednesday, February 23rd, immediately following his candid conversation in the Wygene Chambers Auditorium. Mix and mingle will be going on simultaneously with the book signing, and Tim will mix and mingle later. So some introductions. We want to leave as much time as possible for the main event. So I am going to speed through introducing the next three speakers in their order of appearance. The last person I introduced, Dr. Laveda Taylor, will introduce our keynote and special guest today, Tim Wise. So the next voice you will hear will be that of Dean Ann Gregory. Dr. Gregory was named Dean of the College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences on January 3rd, 2022. Gregory served as interim dean from July 2021 until January 2022. She has also served as the director of the School of Education and Counseling since 2017, as executive director of concurrent enrollment programs from 2017 to 2021. Gregory previously served as chair and professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at both Western Illinois University and Northern Illinois University. Prior to that, she was a professor at Boise State in the Department of Literacy. Earlier in her career, she taught elementary school in the San Antonio Independent School District. Gregory earned her bachelor's degree in elementary ed from Purdue and West Lafayette, a master's degree in education, adult and higher ed from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and a doctorate in curriculum and instruction, literacy, and language at our shared alma mater. Quote, "I'm committed to us as a college beginning to reimagine ourselves," says Gregory. "It's a long-term investment that has to be strategic, intentional, and purposeful with key ideas, transformation, engagement in our local environment, in our community, and certainly this idea of equity and justice." Gregory's research on literacy and education has appeared in numerous peer-reviewed journals and books. Our next guest, who will be joining us remotely, Professor Colette Morrow. Professor Colette Morrow teaches at Purdue University Northwest in Indiana. She's the director of our Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program and teaches literature and writing in the Department of English and World Languages. She has served as the president of the National Women's Studies Association and on the editorial boards of Feminist Formations, formerly the National Women's Studies Association Journal, and the Journal of Gender and Social Issues, published by Fatima Jinnah Women's University. Dr. Morrow also co-edited Getting In Is Not Enough, Women and the Global Workforce, and Unveiling Desire, Fallen Women in Literature, Culture, and Films of the East. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Laveda U. Taylor is an associate professor of education in the School of Education and Counseling. Her teaching and research interests are grounded in post-colonialism, post-structuralism, and culturally responsive pedagogy. A graduate of Louisiana State University with a PhD in curriculum and instruction with concentrated emphasis in curriculum theory, Dr. Taylor's research examines the experience of historically marginalized learners within the socio-political context of schooling. Her work has appeared in Educational Foundations, Educational Studies, Urban Education, Democracy in Education, and Essays in Education. Additionally, her work appears in the following books: Curriculum Studies, The Next Moment, and Race, Gender, Curriculum Theorizing, and her own most recent edited text, Implications of Race and Racism in Student Evaluations of Teaching, The Hate You Give. Dr. Taylor is known and highly respected as an urban educator. A native of Nashville for over 30 years, She has empowered students to rise to excellence at every level. She has served Purdue University Northwest with excellence in a range of positions, including her tenure as head of the Department of Teacher Preparation in the School of Education and Counseling in the mid-2000s. Dr. Taylor has always been keenly aware that when students enter schooling spaces, the need to address opportunity gaps in equity and achievement are paramount. Dr. Taylor continues to be someone who connects with her sense of authenticity, her passion for addressing issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in education, and her ability to embrace her path for continuous growth, as she recognizes that even as an educator, she too will always be a student. Please help me by extending a warm round of applause for all of our speakers today.
Well, welcome. It's a gloomy day outside, but I am assured, based on previous experiences with Tim Weiss, that the heat in this room will increase greatly. I'm excited about that opportunity for all of us to have really authentic, real conversations about difficult topics, things that make us a little uncomfortable, or maybe even a lot uncomfortable. One of the things that I always say when I speak to students about why I became a teacher was I wanted to change the world. I wanted to leave it better than it found me when I joined. I don't presume to have the answers, but as a collective, I believe, I hope, we can find our own path to a better place and a better society that recognizes all individuals for the value they have inherently in them. And so with that, I welcome you to joining us in this momentous occasion, because this is kicking off and expanding our impact in our region. It is about us working together as a collective to make it a better place. So thank you for joining us. And I'm excited about this afternoon. All right. So now I will turn it over to Colette. She's on screen.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce some of the leading activists in Northwest Indiana. I am going to start with the folks who are joining us on Zoom, and then I will shift to people who are physically present in the audience today. I will ask each one of them in turn, if you are on Zoom, to unmute yourself as I introduce you, and then give us a few words to share your activities, about your leadership in the region, for which we thank and honor you today. First, we have Laurel Kilpatrick. Laurel has been involved in social justice activism for most of her adult life, beginning with an environmental justice organization called Coalition for a Clean Environment in her hometown of East Chicago, Indiana, in 2000. Currently, she is the co-organizer with Black Lives Matter Northwest Indiana Gary, a member of Saving Our Families, a community rights organization serving Gary, Indiana, and she also works in disabilities rights advocacy for Everybody Counts in Northwest Indiana. Laurel is also an instructor of record with Indiana University Northwest in the departments of sociology and anthropology and minority studies, and is a board member of the World Institute on Disability, a global disability organization. Laurel stresses that only gender-inclusive, intergenerational, multiracial, accessible, anti-racist movement will secure a true quality of life for everyone. Laurel, thank you so much for being here. You're a woman whose reputation precedes you and a dear friend.
Uh-oh.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Colette, and everyone else there. This is a wonderful opportunity to hear the words of what so many active and inspirational people are going to say. And I think it's very important to point out that our action isn't what makes us leaders. We follow the leadership of people who shared with us the absolute necessity to do something. And that's what I wanted to talk about for very little. As an instructor, you know, we get into this talking thing real quick. I'm gonna try to cut it off. But I really wanted to talk about the importance and necessity of action. And we all find out about these social issues: racism, sexism, capitalism, which is at the root of it all, classism, ableism, etc., and the need for some type of action, to the phrase I like to use, to fight back against all of these things and to fight for our dignities and our goals towards freedom. And action is possible at every level, from ensuring disability benefits for ourselves, helping other people do it for them, getting tuition reimbursement, demanding justice in what is called a profit over people system, right? And I truly do believe that. Or for holding ourselves to the responsibility of being more than an ally, of being an active member, of making a positive difference locally where we are and on a larger scale. And everybody here, everybody in this environment has a unique position to advance the positive action that happens in their communities and starting in our own lives. One way out of many ways to do that is to find out more about the people in the groups who are around you. I loved hearing Gil Scott-Heron say the words that he's best known to say. And he says it so well when he talks about the emphasis on the action of revolution. He talks about what it is and what it isn't. And by far, what he talks about revolution as being is action, not just through an idea, although we know that's where it starts. One of the groups I organize with, as you said, is Black Lives Matter, Northwest Indiana, Gary. People tend to still have a lot of questions about this particular name, this particular title of Black Lives Matter. And they should ask them. To those of us who are a part of it, who are going to be participating in these very short conversations. We've taken that action to issues locally, like police violence in our communities of Gary and East Chicago and Hammond and Munster. The for-profit systemic violence of the attempt to build an immigration prison, and the public and private systemic profit goal of continuing the miseducation of Black, Latin, and working class white students in Northwest Indiana. There are a lot of actions. These are a lot, and there are a lot more actions to do. If you're interested in learning more, if you're interested in joining, and if you're interested in support, please feel free to contact us on Facebook at BLM Gary 2, the number 2, Instagram and Twitter at BLM Gary, or email us at Gary, the number 2, Ferguson @gmail.com. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Colette.
Thank you, Laurel. Now I will ask Ms. Akili Shakur to speak to us. I actually am a little challenged to be able to introduce you to Ms. Shakur. She is a woman who has, for decades, led us in Northwest Indiana and touched so many lives, changed so many lives, including mine, including our current students and alumni, one of whom will speak to you briefly in a minute. So I will cut this short and just say this is a woman who has transformed and continues to transform our region. Her current work is primarily in the organization Saving Our Families, And of course, Black Lives Matter, Northwest Indiana, Gary. Achille, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Colette. You know I love you. Thank you for inviting me. I am Achille Shakur, and I am part of Saving Our Families. I am part of Black Lives Matter, and I'm part of Indiana Department of Corrections Watch. And a little bit about me. Of course, I'm an alum from Purdue. I've also am a retiree from Purdue. And I've had the gracious honor of working with students on various levels at Purdue and outside of Purdue. I also would like to believe that I'm one of the originals that was involved in being bused when they first started busing back in '64. So I'm dating myself. And I have been involved in activism, I would say most of my whole life. It's been a way of life for me. And that with Saving Our Families, we have been a group that has took a holistic approach about working with individuals who find themselves in situations that are out of their control. We work with veterans, we work with regular citizens, we work with reentry with individuals who have found themselves with a DLC number. I work with Black Lives Matter, as Laurel was saying, that we work on things to improve our community. We don't just wait until issues pop up. We try and be proactive to look at what's going on and to address those and find solutions for it. With IDOC Watch, we watch the Indiana Department of Corrections because historically, Indiana has been at the forefront of abusing incarceration. It started at the beginning of the state when people of color had to pay a $500 bond just to be able to live in Indiana and to prove that they weren't runaway slaves or that they weren't going to cause problems while they were here. And so this has been a means since post the Civil War of individuals being locked up just for not having jobs. And it happened not only in the South, but it happened all over the country. And so we watch to see what the Department of Corrections do and how they've done it, the obligations they have to keeping our citizens safe while abusing those inmates who don't have a lifetime or death sentence inside of these facilities, and not acknowledging that when these individuals come out, if they have not had the proper support, they make future victims out of all of us. And so we look at these issues with Saving Our Families, IDOC Watch, and Black Lives Matter. We look to see how that's going to have an impact, a total impact on our communities. And so, as Laurel has said, if you want to reach us, you know how to do it, Black Lives Matter. I will put in the chat if anybody wants the number to Saving Our Families. You can go on Facebook if you're looking for IDOC Watch, IDOC Watch. And thank you again, Colette, for involving me in this fantastic endeavor that I am so proud that my alma mater is finally addressing.
Thank you so much, Achille. And I do want to say, you know, we honor you. We thank you from the deepest pieces of our being. I'll now turn to introducing members of the audience who are present in person. I will begin with Mr. Curtis Fields. Mr. Curtis is the co-founder of NWI Solidarity. He's the co-author of Burning Bridges, Disconnecting from White Culture and Fighting for Liberation. He's a member of NWI Mutual Aid Initiative and the Field Marshal of the White Panther Party Indiana chapter. Curtis started doing his activist work in 2020 during the George Floyd protests. And he was part of a two-person team that handed out supplies to protesters and gave away free face masks at public events. He created NWI Solidarity as a means to spread awareness of communication and communism and anarchism in NWI. Well, I flubbed that line, awareness of communism and anarchism in NWI, as well as networking with other leftist activist groups Now he is working with the White Panther Party. Curtis, I would ask you to go to the podium, and I believe someone is able to support you in doing that on the ground.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to say it's a huge honor to be here. I'm going to preface this with I have a speech condition, so sometimes if I just stop talking, I'll just raise my hand up to let you know that I'm not actually done talking, that my condition's just messing with me. Yeah, fun to deal with. I really don't know what to say, in all honesty. This is my first time ever speaking to a group that's not actively yelling at me. Most of the work I've done has always been on the streets or on the street corners. So it's pretty new coming up to a group that actually wants to hear me speak for once. I started NWI Solidarity with a friend of mine, and at the time, it was just a two-person team. We started in the midst of the George Floyd protests in NWI. I was actually participating in those protests before NWI Solidarity was a thing. And me and him, we came together and we wanted to help out in some way. So we would go around to movements that were happening, and we'd bring supplies like water, first aid equipment, if we could. But by the time NWI Solidarity started, that was when the events in the region were sort of dying down. So we moved on to handing out face masks at public events, just general community work. And as the organization expanded, we got tired of the lack of action in NWI after the first initial phase where pretty much everyone was participating. We got tired of seeing the lack of action. So me, him, and a couple other comrades who had joined by that point, we decided to hold our own actions, which were, the first action we held was not very successful. It was pretty small, but we got the word out. And after that, we moved on to networking with local activist groups. The leftist scene in NWI at the time, and to a lesser extent today, was very fragmented. There was no large, broad leftist movement of any flavor, anarchist, communist, anything like that. They were all small, fragmented groups focused primarily on small mutual aid products or actions. So we went around, we networked with these groups. We went around, we networked with these groups, and what we did was we would take their contact information, we would talk with the leaders of those groups, members of those groups too, and we would spread that information around to other groups, which we screened beforehand and found were reputable. So we got all these groups in contact with each other through us. And from that, we were able to hold a second event, which I think had somewhere around 10 times the original number of people there. And from that, all these groups were able to work together and form larger, broader, more effective actions in NWI, which the area we originally started in, Hobart, Indiana, it's not the most leftist town in NWI. So personally, I'd take that as a success that we were able to get 40 or 50 people on a street corner screaming about leftist ideals. I'll take that as a win. Over time, we did our networking. We had some internal struggles here and there. That was due mostly to my personal inexperience at leading. It was my first time with any activism movements. Partly that, part ideological differences. And eventually we kind of found all the major leftist groups in the area. So we decided to dissolve NWI Solidarity. And by that time, my comrade, Jake, he had helped establish the White Panther Party in Northwest Indiana. So I went on to work with him from that point. And that's where I stand right now. I work with the White Panther Party. I'm field marshal for the Indiana chapter of the White Panther Party. And there's really not much more to say. We have a couple projects in the works, but so far we're just doing our thing, continuing mutual aid projects whenever we can, supporting other smaller leftist movements in the area when we can. And my comrade Jake, national chairman of the White Panther Party, Jake, he would be able to explain more than I can. But once again, I want to say it's a huge honor to be here. I was so excited when I got the email, in all honesty. I messaged him like 2 seconds after I got it. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here and to speak with you all.
Thank you, Curtis. We're going to ask Jake Hansberry to introduce himself. Jake is the chairman of the White Panther Party, which is the subordinate of the arm of the new African Black Panther Party. And he became politically active in 2020 as well. He was a founding member of NWSI Solidarity. I would ask Jake to just follow up with 1 or 2 comments to add to what Curtis shared with us about your activities in the region.
I would like to say it's an honor to be here briefly. And then, so to add on to what Curtis said, we provide a number of different things, and it's not just in Indiana, it's actually nationwide, primarily on the East Coast, and supporting roles in other states as well, aside from New Jersey. We do food distributions alongside the New African Black Panther Party in Newark, New Jersey. They have a community center. It's the first Panther office to be in operation since the 1970s. And we also do clothing distribution. We're working on a housing project with the Poor People's Army. They also operate out of Pennsylvania. And then in support of other organizations, there was many of you may have activism that took place last year. There was one major event called the Treaty People's Gathering. The White Panthers went out to the Treaty People's Gathering in Minnesota, and we did a security role alongside a national coalition of Brown Berets for over 2,000 activists. So just briefly to add on to some of what Curtis has said here, we have a number of programs that we work on and other supporting roles. So thank you all, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Jake. It's wonderful to have you here with us. And now we will turn to the 2 student representatives we have today, who I believe are also in the audience. I'm going to start by asking Jasmine Williams to come up to the podium. She is going to tell you a few words about the PNW Social Work Club. First, I will introduce Jasmine by saying that she's born and raised in Michigan City, and she's been working toward her bachelor's degree in social work at PNW. She cares deeply about advocacy and building communities, and as such has worked and volunteered with several local social service agencies. While serving as the secretary of the Social Work Club, Jasmine has done work with the Youth Service Bureau of LaPorte County. I see she's giving a shout out, and is the current Lilly Endowment Community Intern for the Unity Foundation of LaPorte County. As a community intern, Jasmine is working with a team of members to develop an African American Empowerment Fund in LaPorte County, and that will create solutions to remedy the socioeconomic disparities faced by the Black community. Jasmine hopes that in her current and future work, she can inspire others to inspire and embrace their communities and make impactful change, as I should say she is doing now. Thank you so much, Jasmine.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Colette, for the introduction. So just a little bit about social work club. So essentially what our goal is to promote the values and the principles of the social work field. So we're working towards things like human justice, building human relationships, social justice, what I meant, building human relationships. But really what we're focused on is our service to not only our community here at PNW, but our community within Northwest Indiana. So what we do is annually we have our Got Your Backpacks drive, which we do for raising hygiene products and other necessary products like blankets, or we'll bring in like comforting products like toys or stuffed animals for kids that are being displaced and taken into DCS. So that's something that we do annually. This year we had over 40 backpacks, I believe, which went to all deserving children. Currently, we're working on our hygiene drive for a local school, Creeker Middle School in Michigan City. We're working on with their care closet where we're doing hygiene products, but not only just hygiene products for everybody, but we're being very intentional with what we're collecting this year. And we wanna make sure that it's inclusive to what all the needs are for our kids in the community. So it's bringing bonnets or sponges or do-rags, not just some of the basic things that you usually collect during a drive. So we're being very intentional with that this year. Not much really to say. We're just really excited for being here. Thank you to Professor Morrow for allowing us to speak with you guys today. But really, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm here with our president-elect, Jenna Turner, who will speak to you in a few moments about some of the other work that she's doing. But really, please reach out. Social Work Club is always here to help with any other student organizations on campus as well as that's working to promote, just our community and helping everyone out. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, and we honor you. As Jasmine mentioned, Jenna is also with us today. I will quickly introduce her, Jenna Turner. This indeed is, Jenna embodies the proof that Akili Shakur continues to mentor and support young people as they come up in the leadership at PNW and in our region. With some encouragement from Akili last year, Jenna has been a leading force on campus. She is also a social work student, a junior this year, and she is involved in numerous student organizations in leadership positions, including the Intersectional Feminist Alliance, Circle K, the Social Work Club, and she also was recently the chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Coalition in Circle K. And I will turn it over quickly to Jenna now. Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. Dr. Morrow was one of the first people I ever, we'll say quote unquote, met because it was during COVID. She was one of the very first people I ever talked to and ever really established a bond with here on campus. So she's really, I want to say thank you to Colette as well, because she's really given me a lot of inspiration to change the community, change the campus, change how we look at everything in our everyday lives. So I have to say thank you to her. So a little bit more about me. So yes, I am the president of the Intersectional Feminist Alliance here on campus. I was involved a little bit in the spring semester of the last school year before we were really back into business. So this has been really, really exciting for us. When people think Feminist Alliance, they think, oh, you're just a bunch of man haters. That is not the case, of course. We use the word intersectional because it describes the interconnectivity between race, class, and gender. And so that's something really important that we all have to think about, not just females, also males as well, because we want to promote, female empowerment. We want to promote that women are getting equal chances and equal rights in our everyday lives. Obviously we see a disconnect in jobs, we see a disconnect in class, there's all these different things that affect everyone. So it's not just white people, it's not just Black people, there's a whole there's a whole bunch of different things going on, right? I think everybody can kind of agree to that. So it is our focus to make sure that everyone is taken care of in the way that they deserve to be taken care of as a human. Everyone has those rights. So on campus, what we have, and one of the most powerful projects that we have been doing is a feminine hygiene drive. We have been doing that since last semester, this fall semester. It was the most exciting and most productive drive I've ever been a part of. So we are going to be collecting and donating items to the Caring Place, which is a domestic violence shelter in Valparaiso. I was introduced to them through the social work club. We had a lot of interns who had previously gone there. So it has been really, really powerful. I'm still collecting items if anyone is interested. They are stacked up at my house. They're about yay high. So that is one of the biggest impacts that I think we're going to have in the community. I love doing this, working in this group, working in this club. It's one of the most impactful things I've ever done with my life. So I'm going to turn it back to Colette. I have another club that I'm going to speak about. So we'll just kind of give it back to her to switch.
Okay, Jenna, if you can just say briefly 1 or 2 words, and then we will move on.
Additionally, on campus, I am the president of Circle K International. So that is the collegiate version of Kiwanis. A lot of people are familiar with that. So yes, we do have our individual club here on campus. There are multiple clubs across the state. And this weekend, I will be going to a convention for Circle K in Indianapolis. We're up for some awards from this campus club. So I'm really excited about that. So some things that we do with Circle K here on campus, we have hosted drives for UNICEF. So every year, Circle K in October, they have a trick or treat for UNICEF where we either sell items or get donations. And then all those monetary proceeds goes to UNICEF to the WASH project, which brings sanitation and clean water to underdeveloped countries. So that's something that Circle K has been doing for years and years, and we love to be a part of it. It's one of the coolest projects, to be a part of. And then additionally, just within our own community, we've helped the Humane Society, the Michiana Humane Society. We made dog toys out of old t-shirts and tennis balls. There's just a whole bunch of different things that we can do to get involved with the community that are simple. And that's just a whole bunch of different things that you can do. So if anybody ever has anything that they think that we can do as a club, any club here on campus, we really encourage you to come to speak to us because we want to get involved in things that are special to you. Because if we don't know about it, we can't reach out and we can't help.
Thank you, Jenna, so much.
I
Okay, I appreciate so much what y'all are doing collectively. Just one quick shout out to 2 people in the audience, Jessica Ray Chabo and Carlotta Blake King. And now I'm going to turn the session back to the main event. Thank you.
Good afternoon. People are doing, and I am so thankful for you. So I have a question for you all. Have you ever been to a family reunion and you see someone there that you know, but you never knew that you were related? So you literally run to your elder to ask for verification. Who is that over there? Are they related to us? Are they in our family? Is so-and-so our cousin? And they replied, child, yeah, that's your cousin. And you start to pay real close attention just to see how are you related. Likewise, though this is the first time I ever met Tim Wise, our kinship and related experiences go way back. Tim was born, raised, and educated in Nashville, Tennessee, at the onset of school integration. I was born, raised, and educated in Nashville, Tennessee, at the onset of school integration. Tim graduated from Hillsborough High School. I graduated from Maplewood High School. After high school, I went to and graduated from Fisk University. After high school, Tim went to and graduated from Tulane University in New Orleans. Some of you all may know where I'm going with this. In 1990, Tim received anti-racism training from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in New Orleans, and went on to become youth coordinator and associate director of the Louisiana Coalition Against Racism and Nazism, the largest of many organized for the purpose of defeating neo-Nazi candidate David Duke. From 1999 to 2003, Tim was an advisor to the Fisk University Race Relations Institute. In the early 90s, I began my teaching as activist career as a 7th grade social studies teacher at George Washington Carver Junior Senior High School in the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans, Louisiana. Tim has gone on to do many great things. He has been featured in several documentaries, including 2 from the Media Education Foundation, White Like Me, Race, Racism, and White Privilege in America, which he co-wrote and co-produced. The work has been recognized as one of the best films made on the unfinished quest for racial justice by Eduardo Bonilla Silva of Duke University and Robert Jensen of the University of Texas, respectively. The Great White Hope, Donald Trump, and the Politics of Race and Class in America features Wise exploring how American political leaders of both parties have been tapping into white anxiety, stroking white grievance, and scapegoating people of color for decades to divide and conquer working class voters and to gain political power. Wise also appeared alongside legendary scholar activist Angela Davis in the 2011 documentary Vocabulary of Change. In this public dialogue between the 2 activists, Davis and Wise discussed the connection between issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, and militarism, as well as the intergenerational movement building and the prospects for social change. More recently, he appeared in Chelsea Handler's Netflix documentary, Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea. Wise appears regularly on CNN, MSNBC to discuss race issues. He is also the host of the podcast, Speak Out with Tim Wise. Cornell West describes Tim as his vanilla brother. For me, the kinship is a bit stronger. Tim is my cousin, my brother from another mother, because our paths have been close but never crossed. So without further ado, I introduce to you one of the leading anti-racist authors, social activists, and educators of our time, Tim Wise.
Well, I want to thank you for that incredibly kind, familial introduction, and it is good to finally meet my cousin here in Indiana. When they said you were earlier, when they were introducing you, saying that you were born and raised in Nashville, and that I was born and raised in Nashville, I just want to make sure you all know that's not Nashville, Indiana. I know y'all have one. It is not the same. It's not necessarily any worse than ours. I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying, Nashville's us, and that's a Tennessee thing. It is good to be with you. It is particularly good to be with you in person. I don't know how to do this anymore, though. I sort of do, like it's like riding a bike, but then again, it's not. So I have this fear that over the course of the next hour, because I've been doing Zoom calls for the last like 50 years, I feel, that I'm going to just focus right here in the middle where the camera is, right? Because that's what I'm going to try to look at y'all. I'm going to try to keep my head on a swivel the way they teach you to do when you give talks to folks, right? But I've been so hyper alert about just looking in the damn camera, right? Just look, and I'm glad I don't have to mess with the tech. Y'all got that, because I'm 53, which means that any technology that is more recent than like Atari video games circa 1981 is way past my pay grade. It's like back in the day before Mario had a brother, right? So, I mean, we're talking about very old school technology. I don't know how to do any of it. I'm glad I don't have to mess with it. I want to also thank all of you, both the activists that were with us virtually and those who were in the room, for everything that you're doing throughout Northwest Indiana, whether it's on this campus or in the larger community around these critical issues of social and racial justice and change. And in fact, because it was sort of bifurcated, we had some folks via Zoom and some folks here. I don't feel that we had the opportunity to give the kind of applause and recognition to all those great people that we met a second ago. So could we do that now? And then I'll get into what I have to say. So we are at this very exciting, but I think also deeply concerning moment. And I mean, that's sort of banal, right? I could probably say that at any point in the last couple of 100 years, but there it is. So it might be banal, it might be obvious, but I'll say it anyway. Brett, it's very exciting. See, I am working the technology. That's why it says, see, I told you, I did something to it. I bumped something. This exciting and concerning moment in our history as a country. Exciting because we are still coming off of or in the middle of, even though some days it doesn't always seem like it, the greatest racial justice uprising in the history of the country, just in terms of raw numbers, beginning in the summer of 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. It was a very heady moment for our country. Millions of people, including those who had never really rushed into the streets or raised these issues in their schools, or certainly not raised them in their workplaces, began to do that in many ways for the first time, joining with many millions of others who have been talking about and doing this work around the country for many years. So it was an exciting and heady moment that I think all of us looked at both with excitement, but also some trepidation, right? Recognizing that oftentimes when you go from 0 to 100 in like 2 seconds, you burn out the engine of the car. That's why you don't take those street racer cars, right? That they actually have a TV show about that nonsense now, right? Just like Road Racer, they just go like really fast and they blow out their engine. You don't drive that car 100 miles an hour in 4 seconds, and then when the race is over, like go get milk at the store, right? You got to rebuild the damn engine because stuff's going to be popping off and flying, and you're going to have to, it's, you know, you're not supposed to drive that fast. And when it comes to social movements, when everybody sort of rushes in who hadn't been there yet, it's exciting, but there's a danger that we sometimes don't recognize, that we're going to burn out, we're going to exhaust our fuel source, or that people who were new to the work get the impression that the work is a lot easier than it is, right? And so if they rush to, we get millions of people in the street. Man, Nashville, Tennessee had the biggest demonstration. We're not the only place, but since I got a cousin here, she knows, Nashville had the biggest demonstrations we've had for anything ever during the BLM uprising of the summer of 2020. It was organized by 4 or 5 16, 17, and 18-year-old young women, right? We had like 12, 15,000 people in the street. Now, that's not a lot compared to some places, but for Nashville, that was huge. And we were so excited, but at the same time, we knew that once you get in the streets like that, and you start to think, man, the whole world's talking about this. Everybody's watching this. People in other countries are talking about Black Lives Matter. People around the world are talking about this. We have the attention of all the media, and then, you know, things happen, right? And the energy level wanes, and social movements do what they always do, which they go through high periods and low periods. They also face the backlash of those in institutional positions of power who have an interest of putting the genie back in the bottle. And if you're not used to seeing that, because it's new to you, sometimes it can knock you on your ass a little bit, right? Make you think, God, we're never going to win. My God, you know, it's not working. Well, of course it's not working. It took hundreds of years to get us to this point. It took hundreds of years of deliberate and conscious building of injustice. It's going to take more than a minute. It's going to take more than a summer. It's going to take more than a decade. It's going to take more than the lifetimes of everybody in this room. to get us to a place of justice. Once you come to peace with that, then you can stay on your path. Once you come to terms and can be at peace with the fact that you may not live to see it, then you keep planting the seeds so that someone else can water them and one day we'll get there. You do your part, but we're not always ready for that. And so when the backlash comes, we sort of get burned out and we think, oh my God, maybe justice isn't possible. So let me just get back to what I was doing before May 2020. Because it's easier, I get it. And this backlash has been vicious. An out and out attack, not just on the racial justice movement in the streets, not just an attack on the justice for the movement for criminal justice and police reform, right? And for dealing with issues of law enforcement brutality and the killing of unarmed people. But the larger attack on the whole notion of racial justice, the very narrative of racial justice, right? The attack on even this thing that we call diversity, equity, and inclusion work, which I mean, that is like the bare minimum that is required. Diversity is like, I mean, that's a biological fact, y'all. Like, we've always been a diverse planet. That's sort of how the species keeps getting propagated, is you have certain diversity within the human species. And, you know, that's always been there. This country's always been diverse ever since Europeans got off the boat and added some whiteness to folks of color who were already here. So we've always been diverse, but we've never been equitable. So then we added the equity piece, and then folks got real uptight about that. The inclusion piece, which again, that doesn't seem like a radical concept, but now in the wake of this uprising, folks are losing their minds about the most basic determinants of social justice and fairness, trying to label it all critical race theory, a concept they could not define. If I put a gun to their head and demanded that they give me a definition of it, they could not do it. They would all die. And I'm not a violent person, so I'm not advocating it. I'm just letting you know what would happen if we gave a quiz. Lumping it all under the concept of critical race theory, and what they're really trying to do is shut down any conversation about reality in this country, past or present. What they're really trying to do is to sanitize, indeed whitewash, pun very much intended, the history of who we've been and how it brought us to this place. That's why they want to shut down all the conversations, whether it's children's books on Martin Luther King, which they don't want taught in schools now because it gives people a bad impression of the police. That's literally what was said by one of the leading organizations fighting so-called critical race theory. If they see what the cops did in Birmingham, our children won't like cops anymore. Whose children? Because Black and brown children already didn't trust law enforcement. So I guess we're just talking about protecting white children by not letting them think too badly about Bull Connor. We wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want them to have a bad taste in their mouth about Jim Clark and his goons in Selma that beat folks nearly to death on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So we'll ban that. We'll ban the story of Ruby Bridges. They're after that one too. Ruby Bridges, the Black child that integrated New Orleans public schools in 1960. Y'all have seen the famous Norman Rockwell painting. Y'all, this is Americana. Norman Rockwell, for God, painted a picture of this girl going into elementary school in 1960, surrounded by National Guardsmen, bringing her in, a tomato up against the wall that had been thrown at her with the N-word scrawled on it. And yet that apparently is too much for children to learn about, because Black and brown folks were never too young to face that. But white folks, little Susie Suburb is too young to learn about it. See, that's where we are. We're at a place where we prefer the lie to the truth. And the lie is why we're still in this conversation 400 years on. If we just told the truth from the beginning or at any point along the way, we could have stopped this organically. We wouldn't have to put a lid on the conversation, because we just would have put a lid on injustice itself. And then we could have all talked about something else or gone bowling, right? Or whatever it is people do when they're not talking about. See, I don't even know what people do when they're not talking about injustice, because I got two things. Like, I got kids and I talk about this. So we could all have done that. Right? But we didn't want to tell the truth. What they're really upset about, let's be clear, why did this become an issue now? Why is this backlash happening now? Carol Anderson's book, White Rage, will tell you. Brilliant scholar at Emory University in Atlanta. Every time there has been progress forward in this country for Black people in particular, that has been met by this backlash, this white rage, not on the part of every white person, but on the part of a committed group of white people who have decided to try to push us back to a previous time. It happened after the end of enslavement. It happened during the Great Migration in the 19 teens and 1920s, backlash to that. It happened in response to desegregation. It happened in response to affirmative action. It happened after Barack Obama won, which even though that didn't fundamentally change the structural reality faced by most Black people in this country, it was certainly a huge symbolic evidence of progress and something a lot of folks couldn't get their head around, right? And then it's happening in the wake of the uprising in the summer of 2020, because even though that didn't lead to any major reforms or changes yet either, it changed the narrative for millions of people. Suddenly the term systemic racism was being heard, not just in the classroom, but on the news. Now you had corporations coming out of the woodwork asking for DEI trainings. I had been on the road doing this work for 25 years, y'all. I had done maybe 20 corporate gigs ever. And within the first 2 or 3 months after the killing of George Floyd, I had so many requests for corporate gigs that I couldn't do them all. This wasn't just me. This was a lot of folks who do this kind of work, because everybody was like, we need to have an implicit bias training. We need to have a white privilege training. We need to have a fragility training. And Robin DiAngelo's book, Can You Do It? Right? And all of this, and I was very cynical about this. But I wasn't going to not do them, because if you want to talk about this stuff, by God, we're going to talk about it. You may not invite me back because of what I have to say, but I'll come and do the thing, you know, that you asked me to do, and I'll cash the check. You know, you want to pay me for it. But I was worried, and I think all of us were, that a lot of the change would amount to window dressing, that it wouldn't be fundamentally systemic, because the analysis often wasn't systemic. The analysis around race, even in the midst of the uprising, shifted. Even though we were using the term systemic racism, a lot of this stuff we were doing in response was still a very hyper-individualistic kind of response, like the implicit bias training stuff, right? Now, implicit bias is a real thing. Don't get me wrong. The research on this is crystal clear. It is absolutely the case that we all have internalized certain biases taught to us by our culture: racism, sexism, heterosexism, Islamophobia. All of these things, they are real, and they are deeply held at the subconscious level for many people. But the problem is, if we're talking about systemic injustice, getting clear on individualized damage is not going to suffice. The individual psyche of damaged people. I've been in therapy for 4 years, y'all, and I highly recommend it. Not for this, but just like for anything, and all y'all got something. So really, it's a good thing. And my therapist told me that I should tell you that I'm in therapy, because apparently that is therapeutic. So I'm good for today, right? But one of the things that you learn is, if you don't talk about your past, not just as an individual, but the past into which you were born, the system, the family, let's say, which is a system into which you were born, the environment into which you were born, which is a system. If you don't understand how all of that shaped you for good and for bad, and really sometimes for ugly, right? Then you can't get well. It's not just about figuring out your own damage. It's about the damage that was done to you by both individuals and systemic realities in the interrelationships of people within those systems, right? The same is true with our society, the thing that we learn individually in therapy, but we didn't take that systemic analysis and go very far with it. We started devolving implicit bias training or privilege checklist training, right? Where the companies would get all their employees together and you check all the privileges that apply to you. And then we were surprised that people backlashed against that. Well, hell, I would backlash against it too, for totally different reasons than some of the folks on the right would, right? But what is that? Just like getting a list of all my, oh, look at this, here's my list of privileges. Now I know what I got. Of course, the problem is we live in a society, right, that tells every one of us to take advantage of our advantage. We live in a hyper-capitalistic, hyper-individualistic, and competitive society in which if I got an edge, man, and now I got a whole list of edges you just showed me, and they're all real, but the clearer I get on them, the more I want to defend them in this society. Because in this society, if you're not winning, you're losing, right? That's what a hyper-competitive society is about. You're either winning or you're losing. You're either on top or you might as well be on the very bottom. And so if you show me all the advantages I have, even if I'm a really moral, decent person, if that's all you do, right, then there's that voice in the back of my head that's saying, God, you know, I mean, it's pretty unfair, but it pays the bills. And why would I want to give that up? You know, like I know I should, like I know it's wrong that these other people don't have enough opportunity, but if that's going to cost me, and then people don't do it, right? Because all they know is all the winning that they're doing. And far be it from me to deny that that is real. White privilege is as real as rain. I mean, it is systemic and it has been here for hundreds of years. It was embedded from the beginning, but we can't stop the analysis there, because white privilege has long been a consolation prize that people on the very top of the society gave to working class and struggling so-called white people, so we wouldn't join with black and brown folks to fight for a better system. It was a consolation prize. It was a participation trophy, right? Because historically, that's what whiteness was. It was created to convince all these poor people from Europe who didn't have anything in common with each other, except that they hated each other. Like the history of Europe is people killing other folks just because they didn't pray right. That, you know, right? The English hated the Irish hated them back. Northern Italians didn't even think Southern Italians were Italians, right? Germans hated everybody, and the hate was very much returned, right? And so Europe had spent that time killing each other, not having a white racial, cultural, linguistic identity, but in the colonies of the United States, it became necessary to create this concept, to create this thing called the white race that had never existed as such anywhere on the planet. Why? New discovery scientifically or linguistically or no. Well, there was. The rich people discovered they were outnumbered. That's what was discovered, right? They looked around, they're like, oh, I'll be damned. We brought a bunch of Africans here to exploit them, and we brought these indentured European servants, and I'll be damned, like the poor really outnumber us. So at some point, they had to figure out a way to divide and conquer. If I don't get some of these people on my team, they are going to rise up and take my stuff. I mean, it's sort of, you know, because they're all going to realize they're being exploited. So how do I do? I'm going to call this thing the white race, and I'm going to give them a uniform, put them on the slave patrol, quote unquote. Give them a badge and a gun, put them on the back of a horse, and tell them to keep those people in line for me. And then when the Civil War comes, I'm going to have them go fight for my property in human beings. They don't even own any. They're going to go do the dying because I'm sure as hell not going to do it. See, it's just all a con. It's all a game created to divide and conquer people. That's a systemic analysis, but you did not hear that during much of the uprising because we got so sort of media friendly into the implicit bias. It's easier to understand, right? It's easier to talk about our subconscious bias, or it's easier to talk about privilege checklist or fragility than it is to actually go back and understand our history and where we came from. That takes time, and media operates on 7-second sound bites. So what I just said was like a thumbnail version of it, pretty easy, but it ain't gonna be on the news, right? Because it's too complex. It's like, oh, wait a minute, but you're talking about the colonies and indentured servitude and the creation of whiteness, and you know, it's not really that complicated, but it's way too complicated for our culture as it exists right now in the way that we digest information, which is why it's important to talk about it in schools, and which is why people are attacking us when we do talk about it in schools. Because now I got you for a whole semester. We can break this down, see? I got enough time, we can actually have a conversation. And they said, well, but you're telling children and young adults that racism is woven into the fabric of America. That's un-American. You're teaching kids to hate their country. I have two children. They're 20 and 18. I love them dearly. They are a lot better today than when they were 10 and 8. And I hope that when they're 30 and 28, they'll be a hell of a lot better than they are right now. Otherwise, we're gonna have to have a conversation, right? The fact that I see their flaws and I point them out when they were children does not mean that I detest them, despise them, or anything but love them. It is because I expect better of them. And because I know they were capable of better, and now they've gotten better, and I expect them to keep growing. I expect the same of my country and the same of my culture. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't any of us? So when we talk about racism being embedded in the fabric of the society, it's not a judgment call, it's a fact. And it's not a debatable opinion. It's not, well, that's your opinion, and I reserve the right to disagree. Well, you can reserve whatever right you want. You can call the moon made of Swiss cheese, doesn't mean it is. And when I tell you that racism is woven in from the beginning, I'm just telling you what the founders themselves said. You don't have to take my word for it, because what is the first thing that the Congress of the United States did of any real substance in terms of legislation? What's the first piece of legislation they passed of any substantive value after the Constitution was ratified, because that's the first order of business, right? And you think that's got to be a biggie. Whatever they do first is what they know is most important. So you might think to yourself, well, gosh, Tim, I bet they raised the army just in case the Brits decided to come back and have another run at it. Nope, not that. Well, I bet they figured out the tax system. How are we going to raise revenue for this new country? That's a big one. No, nope, that wasn't it. The very first thing they did was debate and pass the Naturalization Act of 1790. And what was the Naturalization Act of 1790? And why was it so important to get it done first? To send what message? What did it say? It said all free white persons and only free white persons could be citizens of the United States. So what the founders, what the first Congress was saying is the most important thing that we can do today, now that we have this new country and this new constitution, is make sure everybody knows this thing is for white people. They said it. That's not me putting spin on it. That is what they did. But those attacking these lessons in school would make it impossible for teachers to just make that point. Not because that's a political point. No, it's not. It's just reading what was said. It's not putting any spin on it whatsoever. We can debate and discuss whether they had to do that, just like we can debate and discuss whether the compromises that empowered slaveholders in the Constitution had, that we had, people would argue you had to do that or there would never have been a new country because these other colonies, wouldn't have joined the Union. Fine, we can have that debate. We can have that debate both on a practical and a moral level, but you can't act like history didn't happen. You can't just wipe out entire swaths of the part that you don't like. You got to take the good and the bad and the ugly. And that's what folks don't want us to do because that's a systemic analysis. They'd far prefer that we just stay focused on our subconscious. But even our subconscious is affected by the systems. Because if we're raised in a society that tells us we can be whatever we want if we just work hard, that's what our economic system tells us, right? If you just work hard, you can make it. Everybody can make it if they just work hard and make the right choices. If that's the main lesson of your society, and it's not taught subconsciously, that is some conscious stuff. Like that is deliberate every day. That is the message we all get. White folks get it, Black folks get it, brown folks get it, men and women get it, straight, cisgendered, LGBTQ of all types, every ethnicity, no matter what from in the country, from Nashville, Tennessee, or Nashville, Indiana, or the West Coast, or wherever you're from. If you spend more than a minute in this country, you get that lesson. But then what happens? You look around, having gotten that lesson early, that wherever you end up is all about your effort. That's what they told me. And then I look around and what do I see? I see white folks disproportionately up here. And I see Black and brown disproportionately down here. I see men disproportionately here. And I see women disproportionately here. I see rich folks of whatever color up here. And I see the poor and working class down here. And you told me wherever I end up is all about my effort, which means now I start to rationalize that inequality. And I come to the conclusion that those white people must be there because they're just better. And those men just must be there because they're better. And the rich must be the best geniuses in the history of the world, which is why now like 11 people own as much wealth as the bottom half of humanity or something. Keeps changing every few months. Used to be, when I wrote Under the Affluence a few years ago, it was 35 people own the same amount as the rest of humanity or the bottom half. Now it's like 11 or 10 people or whatever, right? Because their wealth expanded so much during the pandemic, right? But you start to assume that that's natural. That the rich are rich because they're just that much smarter, that men are up there because they're just smarter, that white folks are. So now racism and sexism and the class system all become normalized. And once they're normalized, we don't challenge them, see? So even the personal stuff, the personal biases that we walk around with, the assumptions about who's superior and who's inferior and who's harder working and who works less hard and all of that, that still comes from what we're being taught systemically. So even the personal damage can't be abstracted from the system that gives it to us, right? That's what we mean when we talk about systemic racism. We're talking about systems that have their own internal logic, and you can put all the body cams on cops that you want. You can do all the implicit association training in police departments and in classrooms with teachers that you want, but the system of law enforcement, the system of the job market, the system of schooling, these were created in our country, not with equity and fairness in mind, but quite the opposite. And so we have to retool the logic. It's not like these systems are not like apps on your phone, right? Where, sometimes you wake up and it'll be an alert that says, oh, you have a bug on that app and here's a patch to fix the bug, right? Update the app. That's not what this right? This is not a glitch. This is a feature of these systems. Inequality was built into them on purpose. And so are there decent people out there who go into law enforcement? Absolutely 100%. And guess what happens when they call out brutality? Guess what happens when they call out corruption? Guess who sticks around and who doesn't, right? Go look up Michael Wood Jr. and Joe Crystal in Baltimore. These are two Baltimore cops, both white guys, wanted to be cops all their lives, went into policing for all the right reasons. In the case of Wood, his parents had been New York City Police Department detectives, both his mom and dad. He saw the corruption, he saw the brutality, he saw the racism. He asked his parents, my God, what am I going to do about this? They said, you know what you got to do. You got to say something. He did. And all of a sudden he started getting rats, dead rats left on his dash in his car. They started not sending people out on calls with him, back up, leaving him at risk when he would go on calls. They ended up running him out. Same thing with Joe Crystal, same story, same police department. And it's not just in Baltimore, right? That's a systemic logic. Are there good folks in law enforcement? Yes, but if they stand up strong enough, if they even intervene and stop Derek Chauvin from killing George Floyd, which they didn't do, there will be people in that police department, including, I guarantee you, the head of the union in Minneapolis, Bob Kroll, who has a whole history of this kind of behavior, that's going to blame them for interfering with police business. You saw that video, what, like 5 or 6 weeks ago, there was a video went viral of one cop literally grabbing another cop around the throat, white male cop, grabbing a white female cop around the throat for trying to intervene and stop him from brutalizing a suspect. And the police union defended the violence of the cop that attacked his colleague. That's not an individual bad apples problem. That is an orchard problem. And the kind of seeds that we're planting. So unless we make it possible for good cops to challenge the system that they operate in, guess what? The system doesn't change. Body cams are not. Implicit bias training or not. Same thing in the job market. We can do all the diversity and equity hiring that we want to do, but if we don't challenge the networks that give people the best jobs. A couple of years ago, there was a story in the New York Times found that almost half of the new jobs in the post-recession economy, this was not the COVID recession now, but the 2009 recession, about half the new jobs coming out of that were being filled through networking, and specifically letters of reference being written by existing employees on behalf of aspiring employees. Now, in theory, that's colorblind, right? In theory, that could benefit or hurt anyone, but who are the people most likely to already be working with so-and-so organization, so-and-so agency, so-and-so school, so-and-so company? Well, the research finds disproportionately the folks who were in those systems already are going to be disproportionately white, disproportionately male, disproportionately upper middle class, and well-connected economically, which means that you could be the best person for that next opening. But if you're Black, if you're brown, if you're a woman of any race or ethnicity, or even if you're a working class white dude, you are out of luck because you don't know Jim over in the accounting department, or you don't know Bob in HR or whatever, right? And it's a systemic problem. You can do diversity recruitment. You can go to HBCU job fairs, right, and try to find Black employees. But unless you're dealing with the fact that all of these folks are being groomed from the inside by their friends, not even for overt racist reasons, like Bob over in the HR department might be a good guy, but Bob knows who Bob knows, right? Bob plays golf with who Bob plays golf with. Bob's kids go to school with your kids in that same neighborhood, and we know what that's going to look like most of the time, racially, economically, ethnically, right? And so even if you're a really good person with no overt bias at all, that's going to perpetuate exclusion. That's a systems issue, and none of the diversity hiring efforts are really going to get at that unless we start to challenge that kind of networking. Right? We see it in schooling. We can talk about the importance of anti-racist curriculum, and right now with it being under attack, we absolutely have to. We can talk about the importance of making schools more equitable, better financing, more equitable financing. The reality is you can have a very well-funded apartheid system of schooling. It isn't just about the funding. That's important. Money matters. Only people who say money doesn't matter usually have a lot of money, so to them it doesn't matter. I'm not one of those. I know that it matters. It makes quite a bit of difference, but it's not enough unless you have a narrative and a mentality within that system of schooling that is equity oriented. And we don't have that because the school system of this country, from kindergarten all the way up through higher education, was established on the basis of inequality. That sounds hyperbolic. Let me prove it to you. It isn't hard. The reason I say this is important, in addition to the fact that we're in an institution of higher learning right now, is that when you talk to teachers about why they got into teaching, you said to change the world. Sometimes I hear people give a somewhat similar answer. They'll say, well, I got into it because education's the great equalizer, right? And I love those answers, but I got to ask you, when I hear those answers, where have you been living? And what school system are you talking about? Like, if you want to change the world, you got to understand the world, right? And a lot of times people go into teaching and a lot of other helping professions, because you don't go into it to get rich. About schooling, and we think about teachers who say, I want to change the world. The only way they can really do that is to have a clear understanding of the world they're going into. And I think a lot of times new teachers don't know that. That's why they say education's the great equalizer, because that's how we hype it, right? The idea is this is where people go, this is where they learn, this is where they become competent citizens and potential employees and adults and wonderful human beings. But the problem is that if you think that education is the great equalizer, you're certainly not paying attention to how it actually functions, putting aside the theory for a second. But you're not even really aware of the history of how it was created, because obviously at the functional level, it's not doing that, right? Black folks with a college degree are almost twice as likely as whites with a degree to be unemployed. Latinx folks with a degree about 50% more likely than whites with a college degree to be unemployed. Indigenous folks 2/3 more likely than whites to be out of work, even when they have a degree. Asian American folk and Pacific Islanders about 20% more likely than comparable whites to be out of work, even when they have the same degree. So clearly it's not fulfilling that mission, right? White families that are headed by high school dropouts have more net worth on average than Black families headed by college graduates. Let me repeat that. White families headed by high school dropouts have more net worth typically than Black families headed by college grads. So clearly, education is not the great equalizer. And you might think to yourself, well, how do we fix that? And the individualistic analysis, or even sort of a watered down, somewhat liberal analysis, would say, well, we just got to get more money in there, and we just got to get more training. We just got to get some more dough in there, get those resources in there, get those test scores up, get all the, everybody do better. And all that stuff's true. We do need that money. We do need those resources. And I'm all for all kinds of training. But we have to have a systemic analysis that understands that that inequality is not an accident, that it didn't just happen because we didn't have enough money. It happened because our mindset was one of inequality. We know this because the architects of American education said so. They outed themselves. They told on themselves. Thomas Jefferson did it first. In Notes on the State of Virginia, he was describing what schooling ought to look like in the new nation. And he talked about how it was important to have everyone have 6 years of compulsory schooling. Now, he didn't mean everyone, right? He didn't mean Black folks, obviously. He didn't mean women. And he didn't even mean most white people. He meant white males of a certain economic class. What he was saying for them was 6 years of mandatory schooling is what you need. Because if you get 6 years of compulsory schooling, we can, in his words, rake a few geniuses from the rubbish. His terminology. So the point of schooling, what is Jefferson saying? Is the point of schooling equalization? No, the point of schooling is unequalization. Raking a few geniuses from the rubbish, we'll figure out who the rubbish is and y'all will work for us, right? He's talking about an education system, the purpose of which is inequality. Fast forward, Woodrow Wilson. Before he's the president of the United States, he's president of Princeton. He too was a very well-respected educational thinker in his day. What did Wilson say the point of schooling was? He said, here's what we need. We need one group of people to prepare themselves for the receipt of a liberal education. That's the term they used to use for college. It has nothing to do with liberal and conservative. It's just the term they use for higher ed. We need one group to do that. And he said, we need a larger group to forego the privilege of a liberal education so they can prepare themselves for the performance of certain difficult manual tasks. So what's Wilson saying? Another architect of American schooling. He's saying the point of schooling, y'all, is just what Jefferson told you. I just used a slightly different metaphor. Right? It's what Jefferson said, raking geniuses from the rubbish. And here we're going to, have some people go to college, a lot of folks not, so that you can do the heavy manual labor that we're too precious to do. That's what he was saying. He's saying there's a handful of folks going to run this stuff and the rest of y'all going to work for us. Inequality by design. And that was just for white folks, right? Because Woodrow Wilson wasn't even thinking about Black people in that comment. He was a vicious racist. Right? So he's just thinking about inequality even for white folks. He's defending the classist nature of American education. Then when you start adding Black and brown folks to the mix, it's going to be even worse, right? We definitely don't intend to educate them fully and equitably. And so then when you understand this, you can fast forward to 2001, shortly after the No Child Left Behind Act was passed under the Bush administration. And Bill Bennett was on one of the Sunday talk shows. William Bennett, y'all might remember, was the Secretary of Education under Reagan. He was also the drug czar. He didn't do either job very well, but he did have both of them. And he was, for a while there, the worst education secretary in the history of that job. But, records are made to be broken. So it was not too long ago. But William Bennett was Secretary of Education. He was being interviewed on one of the Sunday talk shows after NCLB passed, asked about it, since as the former ed secretary, it makes sense, ask him, what do you think about this big reform bill? And they asked him about that. But the big question they asked him was, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing American education today? Now, that's a big question, y'all. Well, first off, it's the kind of question you ask when you haven't done your homework, and it's like the most generic question you could ever ask. But it's also huge. It's such a big, like, if you asked me that on national television, I would probably, I'm pretty smart, but I'd probably be like, hey, can we go to break for like 2 minutes? Because I just want to get my thoughts together, because I really don't want to mess up the answer to this one. This is big. Bill Bennett didn't need a break, y'all. Bill Bennett didn't take a sip of water. Bill Bennett did not take a breath. He had the answer right on the tip of his tongue. They said, Mr. Secretary, what's the biggest problem facing American education today? And Bill Bennett's answer, the former Secretary of Education, said the biggest problem is too many people are going to college. Now, see, I was waiting for what was coming next. Sometimes I'll just put an internal ellipses in your thought, even when you didn't intend to put one there, that ... thing that says there's more stuff coming. Sometimes I'll just insert that in my own head. Like, surely there's something more to his, like, he's going to say there are too many people going to college, ... who can't afford it. That I would agree with. That'd be great. Or there are too many people going to college, ... who aren't adequately prepared because we sort of cheated them in their K-12, right? All right, I go with that too. There was no ... There was no comma. There was no semicolon. There was no M dash. There was just a big old period at the end of his sentence, which said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. Too many people are going to college. And I remember sitting there watching it thinking, who is he talking about? Who does he mean? Does he mean the rich and mediocre children of rich and mediocre parents who are working on 5 generations of wealthy mediocrity? Because I've known some really mediocre rich folks, y'all. Incredibly mediocre rich people, and nobody ever questions whether they should go to college. Nobody ever goes to the prep schools on the East Coast or anywhere in this country and knocks on the door of the students at Groton and Choate and Phillips Exeter and says, I know you want to go to Yale, and I know you'd like to take over your dad's business, and I know you'd like to be an attorney or a doctor, but I really think you ought to consider trade school or maybe working at McDonald's the rest of your life. No one ever does that. That kid could have a D average. That kid could be the bottom of the class at that school, and they're still going to college. And nobody will question it when they do. But if you're the valedictorian of a public school in Gary, they will sure as hell ask you, right? If you're the valedictorian of top 10% at a school on the south side of Chicago, they will surely ask you and question whether or not you ought to be there and whether or not you really belong there. So when Bill Bennett said too many people are going, I know who he meant, even though he did not say it. He meant poor folks and working class folks of all colors. And he meant Black and brown folks who were increasingly accessing education. They are the rubbish that must be raked from the geniuses, going back to Jefferson's words. So from the 1780s all the way up to the 2000s, we have educational policymakers and thinkers basically advertising that the point of school is inequality, and yet we still act like all we need is a little more money. We have to have a whole new mindset, a whole new frame of reference. We have to make it clear that to be a teacher is to be a revolutionary, right? That to be a teacher is a revolutionary act, an act of revolutionary love and revolutionary commitment to change the society for the better. Teaching to transgress, as Bell Hooks says, teaching to change the society, not just acclimate to it, not just teach kids how to fill out a checkbook and work an Excel spreadsheet so they can balance their monthly budgets, but so they can change this country and make it what it told us it was, but never was. Because our children deserve that, and we deserve that. All these generations gone, they have always deserved it, and we have never delivered that thing. It is precisely because we do love this country that we insist it must be better. That is the most patriotic act that one could take. is one that actually challenges the fundamental assumptions that have gotten in the way of the fundamental assumptions that we parroted from the very beginning, but never followed through on. We have to take a systems framework and a systems analysis. We have to understand that we are the inheritors of injustice. We're not the authors of it. We're not to blame, but there's a difference between guilt and responsibility. All these folks attacking anti-racist education and what they call critical race theory, they like to say, just trying to make white people feel guilty. I don't know how many times I have to say this and write it and speak it into the world for folks to know that that is the last thing that I want and the last thing that any anti-racist that I know wants. There is a difference between guilt and responsibility, though. Guilt is what you feel for the thing that you did. Responsibility is something that you take because of the kind of human being that you are. And when you inherit the legacy of all that has come before, you are responsible for it and responsible to it and must be responsive to it. Because if you are not, it will shape you. You can either try to take it back and reshape it, or it will shape you and distort you instead. This is science applied to history, y'all. It's Newton's first law of motion, which we know colloquially as inertia, right? It's the idea that an object in motion tends to remain in motion, right, until it's met by some equal or greater force. Right? So if I roll a ball down a hill, unless you pick it up, it hits a tree or a mailbox or a car runs over, it's going to keep going, or maybe the ground flattens out and the friction eventually slows it, right? If I take a book and I slide it across a desk, it's going to keep going until it either falls off or the friction between the table and the book slows it down, right? That's inertia, but inertia isn't just a property of the physical universe. Inertia is a property of the socioeconomic and the historic and the political universe. That which happens in one generation affects the next and the next and the next and the next until we get tired, stand up and say enough. Today is that day. This week is that week. This month is that month. This year is that year. The time is now. We deserve better and we demand better for all the people of this country and all the people on this planet. Thank you all so very much for being here. I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I know we're gonna do a few questions. I know we're over time, but we're still gonna do something, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So thank you very much. So we are going to allow enough time for just a couple of questions from the audience, and then there are a couple of questions on Zoom. But first, I just wanted to thank you again, Mr. Wise, for being here. Folks really loved your apples and orchard metaphor, very powerful. Tim Wise was worth the wait, just lots of love in the chat. But I am going to take some privilege on behalf of our secondary ed majors because they have been very vocal in the chat. And so the first question comes from one of them, and she writes, Mr. Wise, could you please talk more about the concept of the social fabric and how to teach this in education?
Sure. Well, you know, I use a lot of metaphor in my work because I think that using one thing to describe another thing or to help people understand a second or third thing can be a very effective pedagogical tool. So I think if we're talking about systems, and the social fabric is sort of this interstitial system that connects all of these other systems that include housing and schooling and justice and the job market and the neighborhood and all that. When you're talking about young people, particularly, let's say, elementary school, middle school age, who maybe are a little young to take a really deep analysis of like heavy political things, but they can still understand systems at the most basic level because they live in one every day. Families are systems, right? And the thing about our families is that they have lots of component parts. Sometimes those parts are working together really well and effectively. Other times they are not. Sometimes that kid is in a bad mood, goes into the room, shuts the door, screams at the parents, you know, or stomps their feet, or I don't know, breaks a toy or whatever it is they do, because that system in that moment is starting to break down. So if we start with these things that everybody can understand, we all have great and awful stuff in our family system that we call home. Some have a lot more of one than the other, but we all are generally a mix of those things. And I know this makes parents concerned because parents don't want you talking about the dysfunction. I get that. So I'm not saying that I expect children to share the argument that their folks had last night or the argument even that they had with their own sibling. I'm not saying we have to get that granular, but I think if we start with the idea of just envisioning the family as a system that has a social fabric, a very microcosmic internal one, but it's one that we can all see. And we can ask students, hey, tell me about the different parts of the social fabric within your family, both your immediate and your extended family, right? And then we can branch it out to the neighborhood, right? We can branch it out to the block. We can branch it out to the neighborhood. We can branch it out to the school that draws from a bunch of different neighborhoods. And we can start to ask, how do those systems change when we go from this very small microcosmic thing out into these concentric circles that are growing, that are broader, right? And what changes and why does it change and how are these things interrelated? So I think that there's a very deliberative step-by-step process that one can take to unfold these things in a way that is not asking people to like harsh on their parents and tell stories out of school and talk about how awful their family life is, though they need a safe place to do that if that's what's happening. But just a way that says, hey, envision this. When we think of a system, what's a system that we all have an experience with? Well, family would be one. And then we just broaden it out from there. And I think then we can start to ask the questions about why those things change. What does it mean to grow up in a certain kind of family? What does it mean to grow up in a certain kind of neighborhood as opposed to a different kind of neighborhood? What are the things that I will and won't know? So even I'm an only child, so I don't know what it means to have a sibling. So if we were having a conversation about that family system and we were having a conversation, somebody who'd never been an only child said, what is that like? I would have to explain that because they wouldn't know. And I wouldn't know what it is to have a sib or maybe several sibs. It's not, there's no bias there. It's just ignorance. I am objectively ignorant about this thing that you have experience with. Well, once we get out to that broader context, if I'm growing up in an all white space or overwhelmingly white space, you're growing up in an overwhelmingly black or brown space. I'm growing up in affluence. You're growing up in working class or lower income community. That means we got some real ignorance about one another that we need to clarify. It isn't about, oh, I don't like you necessarily, or I look down on you, but it's about me having the privilege of being oblivious to your truth. And if we're ever going to get white folks to understand racism, part of it is getting us to understand we have had the luxury for hundreds of years of being oblivious to black and brown truth. Just like people with money generally have the privilege of being oblivious to the struggles of those without it. Because even if they came from a time when they didn't have it, once they got it, it's funny how quick you forget. It's real funny how quick you forget. And so it's just about having these, they're not that hard. I mean, they're hard, but they're not that hard. They're not any harder than any other kind. They're a lot easier than my geometry class, which I clearly didn't do well in.
All right, one more from our ed majors. So being a future secondary educator, these topics are always on my mind. Finding instances and areas to implement these ideas into my curriculum is my intent. I want to know that I'm finding correct information. How do I know that the information I am finding is not censored? How do I find historically correct context to share that was censored throughout their previous years of education? In all, where do I begin?
Yeah, well, look, we live in an era of profound plenty when it comes to information. That's the good news, right? It's easier now than ever to find information. That is the good news. The bad news is that it is easier than ever to find information, right? And so learning to sift through the legit from the illegit is obviously a talent that we need to be teaching long before college or graduate school. We need to be, and I've been talking about this for several years, we need to be teaching media literacy from the time kids are very young so that they can learn, so that it doesn't just fall on the teachers to figure out where do I find good information. That's important. And part of it is, going through multiply validated, research and looking at the methodology behind research and really digging into it very deeply, which takes time and effort, but it's important. Listening to actual historians, not, Chia Mama 420 on Reddit or whatever, who's telling you that you can just, take iodine for COVID or whatever, and put bright lights in your eyes and all your disease will go away or whatever. I mean, there are certain easy ones. That's an easy call, like actual scholars who actually get paid for this, who've actually been recognized as experts in their field is like a basic thing. But having said that, there are also a lot of organic intellectuals that we need to learn to listen to who don't have those degrees, right? So I want to be able to listen to people in the neighborhood. The best information I ever got about the system of white supremacy and about the class system in this country, I got from people who lived in public housing in the city of New Orleans at an average 10th grade education. right? So it wasn't even, I mean, like I took some good classes at Tulane taught by folks with PhD behind their name, but I learned more in the community working with folks. Did they speak about it the same way that the PhDs did? No. But did they break it down in a way that was every bit as legitimate? Absolutely. Now, are there organic intellectuals that are full of it, just like some academic scholar? Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that every organic intellectual off the block who happens to be in the movement, in the city, in the community, in the street is legit, right? The only way you're going to know who's legit is you got to spend time in the community. So I was a community organizer, and that was the first thing they say, you got to be accountable to the community. And then they say, now how do you know who to be accountable to? Right? Well, if you don't know, if you don't spend any time there, you don't know if you just drop in with a survey that you're asking people to fill out. You don't know if you're a nonprofit coming in there to provide some service, but you don't really hang out in the community. So only way I could really learn to whom I needed to be accountable was to actually spend time day after day after day in folks' living rooms, talking to them about their struggles. And after a while, you have the power to discern legit from non-legit. So we need to be doing that, encouraging that organizer mindset, which is you learn by listening and paying close attention. You also learn by teaching young people early on how to do proper research, because everybody, the buzzword on everybody's lips right now is do your own research, but they don't really mean that. Like Googling is not doing your own research. That's just typing in some stuff, and whatever the algorithm feeds you is what it feeds you. And after a while, it feeds you whatever it wants to feed you, not necessarily what you need. So research skills we're not born with them. We have to be taught them. And if we wait until high school or college to do that, it's often too late. So I would say as educators, we want to encourage people to explore. I have always told teachers, if you're teaching young people, whether it's in middle school, high school, college, graduate school, you want to treat things like history, things like sociology, things like criminology. You want to treat all of these subjects like they are their own CSI crime scene. And the job of that student is to go look for clues, right? Let those students come in with the state, for example, in high school is going to have a certain history textbook in most every state. They might have an option of 2 or 3, depending on the state, right? So you got to use one of these books. And I've always said, if I were a history teacher, I mean, if they make me teach the book, I'm going to teach the book. But I'm going to teach the book. And at the end of every lesson, I'm going to say, listen, I need y'all to go out and investigate this crime scene that we just went through, because I'm not sure this chapter is 100% on the up and up. I needed to go out and find some alternative perspectives and interpretations. And then we'll discuss amongst ourselves whether the standard history is right or whether somebody's version got left out, somebody's narrative got left out. That actually makes young people excited to learn history. It's boring to learn history. Otherwise, you ask most college students, what class did they hate most in high school? And they'll tell you history. Now, I would have said the opposite because I was a history geek and loved it, right? But most kids don't. You know why? Because it's just memorizing a bunch of names and dates and battles. And, what are the Articles of Confederation? Give me 2-sentence description. What was the Battle of New Orleans? Give me a 2-sentence description. What? That's not interesting. It doesn't have any connection to the present, which is why anti-racist education, equity education can be so exciting, because we're actually saying, hey, what are these themes that have been with us for hundreds of years, and why do they keep coming back around again? Why do we keep seeing these same struggles generation in and generation out? What does that tell us, right? That actually asks young people to be their own CSI detectives and to figure out 2 things. Number 1, what happened? And number 2, why have they lied to us so far about what happened, right? Because the good thing about young folks know they're being lied to, right? That's what it is to be a kid. To be a kid is to be lied to and to know you're being lied to, right? We lie to our kids to keep their feelings safe and we don't let our kids know the financial struggles that we're having, usually if we can help it. We don't let them know marital troubles if we can help it. We lie to them. We put on a pretty face that everything's good and, as long as we can. Sometimes that facade gets ripped away, but we lie. We lied to them about Santa. We lied to them about the Easter Bunny. We lied to them about all kinds of things. We tell them everything is going to be all right, even when we don't know that it's going to be all right. And the thing is, by the time kids are like 13 or 14, if not earlier, they know you're lying to them. What they desperately need adults to do is to say, yeah, we've been lying. And now you need to tell me why you think you did it, right? And that's the thing about right now at this uprising, the reason that, the last thing I'll say about this, those critics of critical race theory and anti-racist education who say this is about making white people feel bad, there's a really easy way to make sure that doesn't happen. It's clearly not our intent. But is it possible? Is it possible that a white kid might learn about the system of enslavement and segregation and lynching done by some of his or her ancestors, and maybe feel bad about, yeah, I mean, a normal sort of healthy human being might have that reaction. I remember in 1977 reading Roots when the miniseries came out, knowing that my family had owned other human beings and feeling like crap about it at the age of 8. That's what a healthy person does. Now, if you get stuck there, that's not helpful, right? It's important to move through that. But that initial shame, knowing what you're, yeah, of course that's going to happen. But you know how we can solve that problem? Because I don't want that kid to stay there, whether that's 8-year-old Tim or whether that's 8-year-old whoever it is. It's real easy. If you would start teaching about different white folks, we could solve that problem. But who are the white folks we learn about? We learn about founders that did in fact do the deed. We learn about war generals and we learn about millionaires, what we would now call billionaires, industrialists, right? Those are the people we learn about. Well, if you have a bad taste in your mouth about white people in American history, it's because you're learning about the wrong white people, right? There were white people who were abolitionists whose names you don't know. The Grimke sisters, Lydia Marie Child. You don't know about Jeremiah Everts, who stood up against Andrew Jackson's forced removal of indigenous people, one of the harshest critics of indigenous removal. His name is lost to history. John Fee, an abolitionist minister who was defrocked from the Presbyterian church that he was the head of because the Presbyterian Senate said that he could not continue to minister unless he would minister to slaveholders, and he refused to do it, right? You don't know that name. Then we think about white folks in the civil rights struggle. And I'm not talking about the ones that got killed. See, it's one thing to talk about Viola Liuzzo. It's one thing to talk about Goodman and Schwerner, right? And we should talk about them. But see, why don't we talk about those who actually survived? Why don't we talk about Bob and Dottie Zellner? Why don't we talk about Joan Trumpauer Mulholland? Why don't we talk about those who lived to tell the tale? Because see, if you teach about them, if you teach about these alternative ways of living in this skin, if you teach that white folks have a choice and they don't have to be Thomas Jefferson and George Bush, and they don't have to be Andrew Jackson, and they surely don't have to be Bull Connor, that they can be Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, Bob and Dottie Zellner, Mab Segrest in the modern era, that they can be John Fee, then all of a sudden those young people become dangerous, right? Because now they see they have choices. So we could deal with white guilt real easy. Give white folks different role models. It's very simple. And the same people who want to shut down this conversation never propose that. Ask yourself, why not? Right?
Good afternoon, Mr. Wise, and welcome to Northwest Indiana.
Thank you.
My name is Macy O'Rainey, and I'm a proud 80s baby. Let me paint the picture for you. In the 1980s, some of my fondest memories of growing up on the south side of Chicago was putting down a little block of, what was that, not construction paper, but some type of billboard paper to break dance.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the kids in my neighborhood did. We're really good at break dancing and rapping. It was good to see that culture replicated all throughout the United States and abroad. Also in the 1980s, I witnessed a young man from the University of North Carolina come to the Chicago Bulls and revolutionize the game of basketball, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And also in 1985, growing up in the 80s, I saw the Chicago Bears hoist the Super Bowl championship in 1985. I also, in the 1980s, saw the emergence of crack cocaine filter into our community. It decimated our community. It took fathers out of the homes. It swelled the prisons, and it decimated the quality of life in the Black community, knowing that there's no way possibly that the production of crack cocaine could be produced in our environment because we don't have the infrastructure or the environment to grow such an exotic drug. But it was perpetuated all throughout the inner city of Chicago. I also noticed that in public education, that our young people are being diagnosed from everything from conduct disorder to any other special education boxes that are checkmarked with the use of Ritalin, albuterol, Concerta, Depakote, these mind-altering drugs that the United States government has ruled as a Schedule II drug that's very dangerous. Now let's bring it closer to our local dynamic here of LaPorte County, Stark County, and LaPorte County, Stark, and Porter County, just right around this close proximity. The opioid epidemic has also decimated families here. It's also resulted in multiple and a pipeline of deaths. And law enforcement's response to that is treatment. Whereas when the crack epidemic hit the Black community, the remedy was jail time. prison time, jail time, and the jails were flooded. Can you explain and interpret how the handling of these addiction issues replicate inequality and injustice?
Sure. I appreciate the question and the setup for it. I mean, look, the easy answer, obvious one, and you've alluded to it, is that these two things have been responded to very differently. The demographic of the disproportionate identified demographic with both of those drugs is why. Even though plenty of white folks did crack and a lot of white folks did powder cocaine, clearly the disproportionate use and distribution was happening in Black communities, so it responded to one way. And with the opioid epidemic, with fentanyl, with heroin, with oxy, we had an opioid epidemic in the cities in the 70s and in largely Black and brown spaces. But this one has been disproportionately in white, smaller town, rural, semi-rural, ex-urban areas. Disproportionately, not exclusively, because we don't want to diminish the fact that the opioid crisis has also taken a lot of Black and brown lives, but disproportionately it is hitting white folks. And it has been responded to, as you said, with a lot of sympathy, with politicians sort of falling over themselves to be the best on opioids. What are you going to do on opioids? What are you going to do? You know, whereas in the 80s, it was just like, how many prisons are we going to build, right? But I think there's another piece of it too. That piece obviously recreates inequality, both systemically in terms of who is locked up, but also in terms of our mentality, right? What do we think of when we think of addiction? Well, if it's crack, we criminalize it and we think of these people as bad people. If it's opioids, we think of them as people that got trapped by big pharma. Well, they did. I mean, you know, the family that pushed this stuff is certainly to blame for a lot of it, and the pharmaceuticals that helped push oxy out into the world is certainly to blame for a lot of it. But that's sort of an innocent victim narrative, and we didn't have that over here, even though these were also innocent victims of a system of distribution that, as you said, they did not control, right? So that's one piece. The big piece, though, that I think is really important to point out is the irony of the fact that we're having this opioid crisis right now. And this is something very few people talk about. The reason so many white people are hurting right now, the reason so many white, rural, small town, working class, non-college educated folks are dying right now because of opioids is because we did to Black folks what we did to Black folks. Here's what I mean by that. If you decide, right, that the problem of addiction is a crime problem and not a public health problem, you don't create the infrastructure to then support people who need treatment. So yeah, we're talking about treatment for these folks, but are they getting it? Not really, because why? We didn't put the money into that. We didn't put the money into treatment. Yeah, we had drug courts to divert people, right, from a traditional direction within the court system, but we didn't really put the money into rehab and treatment and drug education. So now, even though we're talking about it differently, there are a lot of white folks not getting help because they can't afford the help, because we don't have good enough mental health and drug addiction coverage within healthcare, within health insurance, and within the laws. We don't do enough to provide for people who need that assistance. So the irony is, because we responded to a black drug crisis, as it was considered, and a brown drug crisis with criminalization in jail cells, we spent all the money, and now folks are like, well, why can't little Jimmy John from the trailer park get opioid treatment? Well, because you spent all little Jimmy John's money on the C block over there or downstate in Illinois, you know, in Marion, or, you know, upstate in New York at Attica or wherever, you know, whatever prison you're talking about, you put people in jail and didn't invest the money over here. So the irony is, this is the point. If you indulge inequality long enough, if you indulge racial supremacy long enough because it's not affecting you, oh, well, it's those people over there. It's not my problem. They need to get their act together. It's not my problem. Wait 20 years. And it will be your problem, because now when your children are hurting, you will not have the resources either. And the question is, are we going to recognize that's the cost of inequality to white people? That's the cost of inequality. The folks who didn't think it was an issue. They did the same thing with deindustrialization. When did the plants in Gary start closing down? In the 70s, right? That's when all of a sudden a lot of those jobs start to disappear. By the 80s, they're on a full scale alert, just leaving, right? And people were like, well, you know, you don't have a job because the plant closed down. You should just go where the jobs are. You need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and move. There's a disproportionately Black community. Same thing with a lot of Northeastern and Rust Belt communities, right? When the plants close, you should just get up and move. Black people, right? Get a job. And now you got plants closing down in white communities. Now you got now you got the economy globalized and all these white folks are out of work and they're telling politicians, you need to bring the jobs back to my little town. Well, what happened to move where the jobs are?
right? That's what you told Black people. You said move where the jobs are. And you didn't really mean that, because then when brown folks move where the jobs are from Mexico and Honduras, you're like, we didn't mean it. We didn't mean that. It is just for us, you know. But you see what I'm saying? Like, and so we didn't respond to deindustrialization correctly either. We didn't respond by making sure that there were jobs available or protecting the jobs that were being lost. We just told people to pick themselves up. And now those white folks 20 and 30 and 35, 40 years later are dealing with the same nonsense. Solidarity is not just a word we throw around for shits and giggles, y'all. Like, it's not just something that we say because it sounds good and it was on the signs in Poland in the 1970s and 80s. Like, right? Like, solidarity is a concept that we support because it actually, your life depends on it, or might, right? And if we don't act, so it's not just about what's moral and right, although it's that. It's also, solidarity is also about what's practical. Practically, if we do not demonstrate solidarity with this group that is being kicked in the ass today, it is only a question of time before it is our ass being kicked next. And so we have to have reciprocity for our own sake. And I know sometimes people they bristle at that because they feel like that's too self-interested and, oh, we should do it for altruistic reasons. Why do Black people fight racism? Is it out of the goodness of their heart or because they don't want to die? Right? I mean, it's selfish, right? Black folks fight racism for totally selfish reasons. I don't want to die today. And I don't want any more of my people to die and to suffer. They're not doing it to be good, upstanding citizens. They're doing it to survive and to thrive. Why do white people need more high-minded justification for that? Why do white people need, I mean, it's almost like what we're saying is, well, you Black people, you can do it for you, but you know, me, well, I'm going to do it for you too, right? Like, no, you need to do this for you. Because I promise you, a system of inequality and elite domination is coming for you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point you are completely expendable and disposable. The opioid crisis have proven it, deindustrialization and economic globalization have proven it. Everything that we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years of this country has proven it. And the only thing that these white folks are being offered now are opioids to numb the pain. Whether those are opioids that come in the form of a pill, whether it comes in a needle, or whether it comes at the ballot box, because there are political opioids too, right? Because what is an opiate? Opioid doesn't solve your problem. It just numbs your pain. It just takes your mind off of it. So when a politician comes along and says, I can fix your problem because I can build a wall at this border, never this one. We're never worried about sneaky Canadians coming in, taking advantage of our superior healthcare system, but we're mightily worried about these people, right? So we're going to build a wall here and we're going to turn the cops loose on Black people in the cities, and we're going to do this, that, and the other to solve your problem. It doesn't solve anybody's problem. It doesn't solve anybody. They won for 4 years and they still sacked the Capitol, right? I mean, these are not people that are having their problems attended to, but they voted for an opioid and they got anesthetized for 4 years, right? Just like people have been anesthetized for 400 years. And it's not a Republican or Democrat issue because both parties have engaged in this at various times throughout our history. Basically telling white folks, hey, the biggest problem you have is those Black people over there, those brown people over there. It's the oldest play in the playbook of American history, American politics. Page 1, you open it up. It's rich white people telling not rich white people that their enemies are Black and brown. It's not even like 3 pages deep in the book, y'all. It's like the preface. And certain politicians that don't like to read, they're just like, I'll just go with that. Like, why would I go deeper in the book? I'll just run the play that always works. And it has for 400 years. There have been acts of solidarity to try to resist it, but we got to do a lot better. And the only way we're going to do that is to understand the game that's being run on all of us. This isn't about Republicans and Democrats. It's not even about left and right, y'all. This is about whether we survive or not. This is about whether we actually build multiracial democracy or we perish in some type of authoritarian hellscape that we can't even imagine right now, right? And so when white folks get to where they understand that they're fighting for their lives, not trying to save anybody else. This isn't charity work. This is self-help work. That term that we like to use and throw around to Black people. Do self-help. Well, we got to practice a little self-help, right? Black and brown folks will save themselves, I believe, from white supremacy because they know the cavalry is not coming. And if it is, it's not for good reasons, right? So Black and brown folks will liberate themselves. I'm curious, though, who's going to liberate us from white supremacy. Because it's not Black folks' job to save us. It's not brown folks' job. You heard in my intro that I did the work against David Duke in Louisiana in 1990 and 91. Here's an open Nazi. Trying to pretend like he's not, but he has a history as a Nazi. It's not a term I use lightly. I know a lot of people throw it around for like you know, their uncle that they don't like anymore, or, you know, their cousin that made them mad. Like, no, I only use that term for actual ones. He's an actual Nazi. And he almost won the United States Senate race in 1990. He got 60% of the white vote, got 55% of the vote when he ran for governor among white people. He only lost because black folks were like, yeah, no. Right? Black folks went to the polls and were like, we're not today. Like, you're not going to get the Nazi today. We're going to stop you. Right? And I remember sitting after it was all done thinking to myself, what does that say that black folk just saved not only themselves, which they were definitely going to do, but they saved us from ourselves too. That was an awfully generous act of kindness that they didn't owe us, because we were all perfectly prepared to give them a Nazi for a US senator or the governor of Louisiana. That's white folks were ready. 670,000 deep were like, yep, I'm voting for the Nazi. Right? And black folks stopped it. And so at some point I remember sitting there thinking, when do we just save ourselves? When do we stop asking black and brown folks to do all the heavy lifting? When do we stop asking them to be doing all the dirty work, right? When this is a system that people like us created and told us it was good for us. And now we're coming to find out that it had this long-term poison, this long-term toxin that once it gets into you, it eats away at you. We deserve better than this. I actually think white people are better than this. That's why it's so funny when I get accused of not liking white people. I love me some white people. My wife is white. My kids are white. Right? I love them, man. I mean, like, the people I love in this world, lots of them are white people. Nothing wrong with white people. The problem is whiteness. And if you don't understand the difference between white people and whiteness, that's why you need to go back to class before they ban all those classes from being taught. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.